Hello and welcome to the April episode of Unlearning Labels.
Unlearning labels is about talking the walk of I see you, I hear you, and I value you. Our mission is to offer solutions and to provide a safe space for conversations that impact organizations. This way, companies can better understand their challenges, gain clarity, and raise awareness, both at an organizational and individual level. Contact us to start taking actionable steps on the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for one-to-one executive coaching. Enjoy this episode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we are so happy to have Laurna Munro all the way from New Zealand. And she is a wonderful and amazing woman who I met recently. We were in, I guess, like a summit back in March for Women's Day. And she is here to discuss tips on how to implement care for your people and that affects their resiliency where it comes to mental health in the workplace. And, you know, what I think is really interesting about this conversation is like a basic question like, how are you doing? Is a good indication of like the mental health of your staff. So welcome to the show, Laurna. And
thank you.
Yeah, let's just jump in.
How are you doing this morning?
Well, since it's mid-afternoon for me, I'm a little tired.
For us, it's almost a bedtime in the evening.
Yeah, it is kind of good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it totally is. I've got the sun rising on my end of the country. Yeah, I think we had a really wonderful talk for Women's Day, and it was such an empowering group of people that I walked away thinking, God, I don't even know if anyone logged into this conversation, but I don't care because I loved it so much. And I think one of the things I loved is the transparency that people brought to the conversation. And I think that's an important part of creating an environment that creates safety for people so that they can be performing at their best in the workplace. Because if they don't feel safe, they're going to be second guessing their decisions. So being able to create that environment helps create a good place to work.
Absolutely. I mean, this is happening all the time around us, but I think people are not really aware of why people do things that they are, I mean, I would say sometimes they're stupid, sometimes they're even reckless, sometimes they hurt others, sometimes, and we think people are bad, people are this, people are that, but lots of that comes to how they feel, their mental health. And recently we were discussing this with Cordelia, and it was about, what must be going on in someone's head to mistake a gun for a taser, and stuff like that. So lots of that in my eyes, because people do well when they feel well, comes to stress levels, mental health, and the way they see the world. So I think that's one of the things that we wanted to uncover today is, what is really going on. Medical, look at me, the mental health is still a big taboo. Nobody talks about a comfortable subject. And therefore, we are running away from it. We are labeling it, pushing it away. But what else can we do?
So I suppose I have a real passion around the interconnection between inclusion and well-being. And as I've been trying to unravel that, I used to sort of see it that well-being was the bedrock of inclusion, but I actually now see them as side by side almost. You can't have one without the other. If you do one, it makes the other one better. And in that study, I came across a research paper that was talking about stress-induced deliberation to intuition. And what it talks about is the concept of when we are well and not stressed, and we have a toolkit of resources we've learned. You went on the course on unconscious bias, you went on the course on how to communicate effectively and things like that. When we're not stressed, we're able to better draw on those tools because we're not knee-jerk responding in our environment. When we are stressed, decision bias comes in because we go into habitual responses as we sort of react to the world around us. And I think that speaks to those things of when we see the bad behaviors or what we expect to happen rather than what is actually happening right in front of us. And so therefore, we start making decisions that aren't in the interest of the organization or aren't in interest of the actual situation. And it's purely an interest of protecting yourself in that stress mode. It's that fight or flight kicking in. So what we need to do within organizations is create a place where people can flourish and be well and have the space to say, hang on, I'm tired. My child kept me awake all night. Let me leave that decision till tomorrow, or can someone else make that decision? And you're creating that place of safety where people can bring what we refer to as their whole selves to work and be able to say, I recognize I'm not in a place to make a good decision, and either sharing it with other people to help you make it or stepping away from it until you're ready. So I think it's one of those things we really underestimate how much the world around us and all those things that are going on either in the workplace or at home are impacting our ability to do well. And we seem to think we can go, let's put my stress aside and carry on with my work. And we can't do that anymore. It affects our productivity. In New Zealand, we've got one of the worst productivity ratings for the developed world. And I would definitely say that that separation between work and life is one of the hugest causes of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big, I wouldn't even say believer, because belief can be true or not true. But I've really seen it on myself and the people around me that I work with, is that when people do feel well, they do well. And it's one doesn't go without. You can't do well if you don't feel well. I mean, was it the quote that you just pulled up? We were watching something and it says, what it was about fear, Peter? This is like, because I was scared, that's why I made all the bad decisions. Like, it's really interesting, and we don't think about, we think that we can just go on and not really take care of ourselves.
I found it. Sorry, fear makes us do a lot of things that we shouldn't, and it's so true, right?
Yeah.
Because I just want to rewind or circle back to what you said, and it's when we bring stress into work and we try and separate like it's taking off a jacket, right? And I guess it boils down to awareness as well. We do it innocently. We've all been guilty of it, right? But when we bring stress into work, as you said, we're more likely to do things that are not going to serve us, or crucially serve our team, serve our peers, serve the organization. Because when we're in that fight or flight and really stressful, we can't really see the wood for the trees, right?
Yeah.
So we're usually going to be individualistic because we're in emergency mode, right? Yeah. And like you said, we need that psychologically safe environment, because when someone's off, you also need people around you to say, look, it's okay. We've got you back, and me too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way of saying it, that concept of the we've got your back. When you're working in a team environment where you've got that synergy going, it really creates an environment where people can flourish. It's not just about, I'm not an expert on this. I'm going to tell the team so that I can draw on their experience to help me make some good decisions or to help me learn about this in a better way. If you're in a fear-based environment where the trust as a result is low, you're not going to reach out to anyone because they're going to trample on you or potentially use that opportunity to get one up on you. So you'll try and find through scrolling the internet or getting stuck in something and losing productivity once again, because you haven't got that ability just to reach out and say, I don't think I'm an expert, you know. And it's only on this little slither of thing that I'm trying to do right now. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to think about how they're interacting. Those social exchanges are so critical in how we create high trust environments, because if you have your high trust environments, you create a barrier for stress, essentially.
Laurna, you bring up really an excellent point, because and I love that we're on 3 different continents here, because that was like a major problem here in the US, like right I want to say it was like right at the end of last March. There were so many articles coming out about that, right? A lot of managers, they wanted to micromanage. They didn't trust their employees, right? But of course, they can't have them coming into the office. And I think that was really the main reason why so many women quit their jobs. I don't know the stats on the women that were actually fired, but it's just they were in a fear-based environment, and they were like, oh my gosh, I'm not trusted. I have all these things to do at home. So can you speak to that? Like, what could, let's say, these companies here in the United States, they are on that ramp back up to build trust. Like, what are some things that they could actually do?
So I think the first one is for managers to be signaling that you are there for them and that you're willing to allow space for all of who they are, essentially, to work, and encouraging that between colleagues. So it's first of all essentially inviting the conversation, and within that concept, having the conversation about how we want to socially interact. I could sit there with a rule book and create, I could write a book and create a list of the things that here, these are the things we're going to do, this is how we're going to interact. But that social exchanges is a critical part of that, I would suggest. So therefore, getting together and talking about what good social exchanges look like, what healthy social exchanges look like, brainstorm that as a team and start to then make commitments to those as a team. I did one which was between 2 teams, where one team was feeling like they were being consistently bullied by another team, and feeling very threatened, and obviously fear was high, trust was low. And in that conversation, we just started by trying to have empathy for the other team. So asking this team, well, why do you think they're treating you that way? What might it be? So in that conversation, we had a shift of thinking that went from them wanting justice to wanting to help that team be recognized for the extra pressure they're under and resolve that. So a huge part of it is about the journey of conversation. So I said social exchanges, having the brainstorm rather than creating a list of rules, and creating that social commitment between each other. You'll hear me talking about again and again on the concept of calling in instead of calling out. Why I like to try and bring a focus to the difference in that is we've got a nasty culture worldwide where we've got this beautiful uproaring of inclusion behaviours, and then when somebody does something which is out of line of inclusion, we tend to shoot them down. We tend to push them away. We're like, why have you turned up looking like that? Because that's cultural appropriation. Yes, it might be, but they didn't know that. And the breadth of knowledge we need to know when we're such individual people is huge. So what I'm suggesting that people do is call people into a new behavior rather than calling them out for the thing they did. Now, when people are persistently nasty, or it becomes clear that they are poking at a situation essentially. So they're purposefully creating a behavior. That needs to have a strong people management around it. But when it's people just responding to their environment and living essentially, and through living making errors, we need to be calling people into a new way of behavior. And by doing that, we're helping them see a different way of doing things rather than putting focus on guilt or shame. So when we create that sort of environment, it doesn't matter whether it's inclusion stuff or whether it's being late to work or whether it is someone who keeps on making a mistake in how they're doing their spreadsheet. If we call them in with this is the way you can do it, this is impact what you're having is doing, can I ask for your commitment? Or is there something preventing you from doing it this way instead? Because there might be something you're missing as well. So it's that social exchanges and creating an environment where we're caring for each other and how we're having those conversations rather than criticizing each other as a form of trying to make things better. Anything anybody wants to add to that?
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for mentioning this calling out. And I think there is so much pressure. And one of the reasons why people also may have been feeling increased stress of how to behave is because there is tremendous change, which is amazing. But also, I think it's because also very emotionally charged, it can be, we can be hurting the other way around. Calling in, beautifully said. Thank you very much for pointing it out, because I don't think we're talking about it enough. But yeah, what you said reminded me of blue zones. Blue zones are area in the world where people live really healthy and very long. So they're not just old people, but they're mentally
fit,
fully switched on, fit physically. And there's even some cases where people that when they left those environments, say years ago, went to live in different country, got sick, came back and healed, like from cancer and stuff like that. It's pretty amazing. But what they researched, it's not the food. Food is different. There's different areas in the world. What they found is same to each of those environments is social connection that they had with people around them. So there was stress. There was, somebody dies, somebody has an accident, something happens. But they knew that they are safe because there were people around them who were really a support network. So what you said really reminded me of that study. And I think book is actually called Blue Zones, written, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so. But
I'm writing that down.
It sounds really like in a blue zone, you'll have more listening, right? And so just taking that concept, you can create that anywhere, right? And so to what extent does listening, right, and that kind of communication between leadership and staff have affect the mental health?
I think that sort of concept of the 5 ways to well-being, which is a piece of research around what it takes to be well, essentially. And so connect is number 1, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. Now that's things that we can create in our own life. So that's my personal well-being. And what I notice with a lot of well-being programs that I've looked at when I talk to people about what you're doing for your organization for well-being, it's about those things which are really important, that we teach people how to do those things or give them research and tips on how to do that. But that's my personal well-being. So it's my responsibility to do that. But as an organization, we have the responsibility for ensuring there's a well workplace, essentially. So in what I experience with organizations is more often than not, when you look at the wellbeing program, it's how to stay well in spite of what we do here at work, rather than how can we give our managers tools and our staff tools to ensure the way we work protects well-being. So that's looking at workplace stresses versus life stressors, essentially, or personal stresses, non-work stresses. So when I look at workplace stresses, there's things like your change management, there's the environment you're working in, there's your culture, things like social exchanges, there's your management practices and things like that as part of those types of things. So I think there's an opportunity for organisations to think a little bit more critically about their own organisation and how it is affecting their staff well-being. Sure, give them triathlon experiences, sure, give them walkathons, get them to do healthier shared lunches, and create those environments where people can encourage each other to live well. But if you encourage them to live well and they're working in an office that has hardly any natural light, you're eroding their well-being for all those hours they're at work. If you encourage them to make a beautiful lunch to take to work, but they're working through their lunch hour and trying to chomp that down in between meetings or whilst they're doing some typing, you're eroding their well-being. So thinking more critically about how the workplace, the patterns of work we do and how we're engaging at work is eroding people's well-being, and looking at how we can create habits and expectations and the way we function is nurturing people's well-being rather than eroding it.
I wanted to circle back to a little bit earlier in the conversation when you talked about productivity, right? I'm just curious. So I don't really know much about New Zealand, so I'm really curious, super curious really, to find out why is it so low in terms of productivity? What do you think is the root cause, or is there a root cause of it?
So there is the issue of how we calculate productivity. So productivity internationally is recorded on the hours of work people work on average in a country versus the dollars they get per hour. So if you think about it like that, if you have a lot of people that are doing low-income jobs and having to work long hours to provide for their family, that shows up as low productivity. So in New Zealand, we are far away from other countries, so our ability to export isn't very practical all the time and doesn't have a cost-effective solution. As for Finland, has some great resources, which has high income earning rules, and so therefore there's a productivity element there. I think they only do an average of a 35-hour week versus New Zealand, I think it's a 48-hour week sometimes. Yep. So when you start looking at those things, as a country, as a nation, what you're looking for your government to try and do is look for those high income opportunities where you can move people into those roles. So for New Zealand, one of the things we do amazingly is Fisher and Paykel technology, all those little tiny microchips. And I believe that has an hourly rate roughly of about $185 an hour. So woo, New Zealand dollars. So if we could be capitalizing on those opportunities, you're getting people into satisfying, purpose-giving type work. And if you look at the flow-on effect to that happening in a country where you're getting that productivity, where it's a safe environment so people are able to innovate more, they're able to create even better technology which becomes smaller, where it's easier to export. So you sort of look at the ripple effect of that. If we are able to move a good portion of our country into purpose-giving work where they're innovating and safe to do have that challenger safety and learner safety, you create a richer country. And in doing that, you have the ability to raise the income of people who are in those base type roles where it's the minimum wage. because you have the richness in your country to be able to afford to pay those better wages because you've got better tax coming through. So you have to look at the productivity from a country and system view. But from an organizational view, it really does come down to looking at how you can create that productivity through helping people make good decisions. And as we've talked about, good decisions are really difficult when you're stressed. So if we can't create that reduced stressed environment, stress is good when it comes in short pieces and the bouts and flares. It's not good when it's sustained. And what we're experiencing in organizations is constant, sustained stress, whether it's the stress that they're taking at home, whether it's the stress of hiding that they're an LGBT person and don't feel safe to come out at work. There's so many stressors going on, and it's just different stressors going up and down. We need to reduce that baseline so you have the ability to have the little flare of stress as they go through challenging each other. To come up with the innovation.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Wanda has put some comments in, so I want to acknowledge her and say, hi, Wanda. And she told us happy Wellness Wednesday, although I know it's Thursday in New Zealand. so we're straddling days. But so she says, yes, I believe that employers need to do things to boost the morale in the workplace. And then she continues, sometimes it's the manager's attitudes that come from personal issues at home, and they bring it to work and take it out on their employees. And so fair point, because I think you've spoken to that actually on both levels, the staff level and the managerial level. So I know, Peter, you were about to speak. So
no, I'm just curious about, I get that obviously if you get into richer jobs and more meaningful jobs, then it's better. And obviously the pay helps as well. That's obvious. But I still see a challenge where globally as well, it's not just in New Zealand or where any of us are right now, but there's that issue, that mismatch of forcing someone to be in that role for X amount of hours in the week. But that doesn't always equal productivity in terms of actual good output, right? And it's been a good frame, right? Because it has kind of been a bit of a reset for companies to realize that just because someone's clocked in X amounts of hours doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do meaningful or great things, right? But I still see, what I wanted to ask you about, what do you think about companies that are, okay, they might have offered a bit of flexibility, work from home or hybrid or whatever, right? But I see a lot of tools coming out, using automation and AI to track people. And I really think that's dangerous. I really think from my personal view that sometimes when I was in the office, in my corporate past, I would do short bursts of really focused work. And then if I'm really honest, there were certain times in the day that everyone's got their own clock, their own rhythm in the day, when I was just, I knew I was burnt and it was my self-care time. So I'd probably go and spend more time with my team versus actually trying to work on a project or whatever it was. But my employer at the time, and most employers, and quite innocently sometimes, they just don't get that. So they don't really allow their employees enough freedom or, as we pointed to, psychological safety to do what makes sense, right?
Yep, I love that point. So we're going through in the inclusion world this thing where we're trying to educate managers all the time. This is what ADD people need. This is what mothers need. This is what a person in a wheelchair needs. And we're kind of expecting managers to know all this stuff, and it's so unfair. There's a much better way. From a psychological safety point, there's a concept of the external and internal versus the individual and the system. So when you look at that, within psychological safety, it's not just about the ability for you to externally communicate what you need. It's knowing internally what you need as well. So there's personal responsibility to know thyself. So I should be able to turn up at an interview and saying, if you want the best out of me, this is what I need. So whether that's for your disability needs or whether that is for your family needs or your LGBT needs, or whatever that sort of need is in that sort of inclusion world, or just within the productivity world, we need to be understanding ourselves better to be able to communicate that. But from a manager's point of view, they need to be getting better at asking that. So at the moment, I think it tends to be, because of the way we're teaching inclusion concepts, being very modular focused around people, females versus disability versus minority groups of race and things like that. They're going, okay, so this person's in a wheelchair. I need to remember to ask them, what is it they need if they're going to come and work with us? We should be asking our staff this all the time. So as part of a recruitment cycle, it might be that they say, I need Visio because that's my preferred mapping system. And then you know what their expectation is. You can get it for them before they start work. We all have that wonderful experience of the first week of work where it takes you a week to get a sign on. But if the manager's better equipped to know what tools that person needs to perform and be productive, they can support the person, or they can be negotiating the training gap. So if they say, look, we only use Lucid, we don't use Visio, you know the training gap that has to exist to shift that productivity. If they're coming into an environment where they're using Google instead of Microsoft, you know there's a training gap, and that training gap creates stress for people, and it creates productivity issues. So it's a conversation we should be having with each other and with our teams as part of recruitment, but also as part of those continuous development conversations. Did that answer your question? I felt like I went off track.
I think that's clear. We should be asking what people need to do the best work, right? But there's also another part of it, which is knowing what you need for yourself. And I think to the point of, I think Tomette, I hope I got that name right.
Tomette, yes. Yeah.
Leaders really need to go there first. If you don't know what you need yourself to nourish you, it's going to be difficult, pointing back to the listening piece, to understand what employees want, what teams want, and crucially what an organization wants, right?
Yeah, because you end up in a loop of listening to your own thinking, and people can be shouting all over you, but you just won't notice it. The other thing that I'm noticing Tomette's question is, can an employee change the minds and hearts of the leaders without putting themselves at risk? Yes. Just a little quick one. I would also ask, what is the risk? When we are scared, we won't go where we need to go usually. And so I'm just a little pointer there, but go on, please.
That is such a complex concept. It's that whole, do you give before you receive, I suppose. It's in reality, when people want to change the hearts and minds of their leaders or talk about a situation, there is vulnerability, and there is a potential, if that manager is not understanding it, becomes a career limiting move, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I find that there's an opportunity for interceding more often than not. So staying away from gossiping, because interceding and gossiping, I suppose, can be mixed up sometimes. So thinking about the purpose of what you're trying to communicate to someone, and there's sometimes usually that ability to go sideways to have a conversation, and upwards with finding a manager you trust. So look for the people you can trust and have the conversations there, with setting the expectation that it's not gossip. What you're trying to do is give them that information so they can mentor their peer. So if you're having a trust issue with a one-on-one manager, sometimes that's the way to do it. Most countries in the world have speak up or bullying or whistleblowing type policies and procedures and legislative expectations. So understanding what those things are and understanding the pathways within your organization where you should be able to safely, without the fear of persecution, being able to raise the process. So most organizations do have that throughout the world. It's whether they trust that process or not, given the environment in the organization. So there really is a huge thing about finding those points of trust. But I've seen powerful change happen within organizations where it's shifting leader thinking through personal stories. Sadly, what happens when people go up the ranks of leadership is they have less and less experience of what it's like to live in the real world. Because they're getting into a small group. Their in-group is changing through their career, and they start to forget the experiences they had. Even if they are a woman or a person of minority or anything like that, they start to have protections that people on the storefront and where people of color are interacting, they're interacting as a person of color, and getting the racism sort of experience. The type of racism they experience is different as they go up the ranks. So in New Zealand, after the horrible shootings that we had in Christchurch, I was working with an organisation where the CE became absolutely shocked and horrified to discover there was racism happening within the organisation. She just did not fathom it would be a thing that would happen within the organisation. And I, on the other end, was like shocked and horrified that she didn't think that, you know, for the size of our organisation, of course there would be racism.
Yeah, of course.
And what it did take is it started with one person speaking up and saying, I don't feel safe. We had a counsellor come into our Christchurch office, and because the person was Maori instead of Muslim, well, you could get a Maori Muslim, but this person wasn't Muslim, and the counsellor didn't understand why the person who was Maori was experiencing more fear now than they were before, and was basically said, I don't understand, get over it. Thank you, counsellor. So we had to rectify that situation and find more appropriate counsellors to be able to support our people in Christchurch. As part of that, it really became apparent that people were more fearful than we realised. And we had a storytelling opportunity where there was an open forum for any staff to come along and speak directly to the CE and just share their story. And it really changed her perspective and her heart. And the powerful video that she recorded and shared with all staff around how she was horrified of people's behaviour and setting the tone of the standard of behaviour was so powerful because of the emotion that she shared it with. It wasn't just a leader doing a, here's my script. It wasn't just a leader saying what our values were. It was a leader expressing the hurt that she felt for the stories she had heard, and explaining how inappropriate that was. So there's beautiful power, and if you can create a moment to bridge that gap between leadership and frontline with storytelling is so powerful. But it's making the safe space to do so.
Yeah, speaking of which, we do have people tuning in from yet another place. So we have someone watching from Kuwait. Thank you for tuning in. That's like your old neck of the woods, isn't it, Peter?
Yeah. We're getting nostalgic thinking about the area of the world.
Yeah, I just want to, just what reminded me of our conversation, so thank you, it's been a rich one so far, is to Tomet's point again, it's just when you see your individual view as an employee that it's a toxic environment, as you pointed to, Laurna, there's mechanisms in place, but let's be honest, a lot of the times the compliance stuff doesn't really work, or at least hand on heart, and all the organizations that I worked for, it wasn't like black and white, good or bad. They were just too big, and there was lots of systemic problems or challenges, right? And yeah, if you can find a way in, find some allies, build a community, and start to bounce ideas off and find out, is it just me? And start to build a mental map of that reality. Is it just my reality and I'm in a feedback loop, or is it actually real that the leaders are not listening to us? And then, by getting curious that way, you will get more awareness around that topic, and then it'll make sense what to do. Because there are many steps and there's lots of tips we can give, but crucially, every organization is like a totally different animal, right? So it's never a one size fits all. And if you look at some of these challenges, I mean, let's be honest, sometimes you have to just vote with your feet. If your leadership team isn't listening, and you have tried, you've tried to do it in such a human-centric way and put your hand up and said, look, I need to say these things, and you're not being listened to, or, sadly sometimes ignored, then it's time to look for somewhere else. And I know that's not easy, because Mira can point to situations in my career where I stayed in roles too long because I was scared and fearful, right? So what would you say to people listening? What can we do if they don't have a voice? And, as Cordelia said very early on in the conversation, if people are not listening, what can they do to, get themselves out? Or crucially, what other steps can they do while they're still in the role to nourish themselves and feel mentally okay, right?
So once again, I probably come back to that concept of their personal well-being. So if their workplace is not looking after the workplace well-being, they need to put the time and effort into that personal well-being. Otherwise, their mental health will start to languish, or it probably already is. So sitting down and making a plan. So it's called the 5 Ways of Wellbeing. I know that the UK and New Zealand and Australia use that same sort of model. It's becoming a lot more prolific through those areas, and I've seen it come up in Canada as well now. So it seems to be growing because it's a research-based solution. So that's connect, finding times and places to connect with people and help that, work on those relationships. Be active. I'm not a very active person, but I still get out and move. So that whole moving your body is a really good way of helping your brain untangle stress, essentially. So just physically moving. It doesn't have to be doing the run and getting into triathlons. You could be doing some of that activity from your couch, but be more active today than you were yesterday. Take notice. So that's the whole sitting in nature, or even if it's just sitting down to have your lunch and really being mindful and present for eating that lunch. Even if you have to book an office in your building to create a take notice time. So sitting in nature, eating something, looking at a child laugh and play, take notice of moments that are filled, that have some, joy in them. And finding the joy in them. Keep learning. So do some time to learn some new stuff, whether it be knitting or a new algorithm, doesn't matter. Just keep your brain learning. And giving. The power of giving. A lot of people do donations and they have them automatic payment coming out. If you can't find a way to do your giving, stop doing automatic payments and start handing it over physically. Give your time or energy if you can't give money. But giving is such an amazing payback experience. So finding a way to be present and active as part of that giving, rather than doing it as an automatic thing, I suppose, is what I'd be recommending. So look after that. Absolutely, is show with your feet what you can look for those opportunities outside of your organization. But build that resilience. Most organizations around the world provide EAP, so that's your employee assistance program. You may call it something different, but usually you get a certain amount of free counseling sessions. People really misinterpret that and think of it as an ambulance at the bottom of the hill scenario. I really recommend that people be using it as a proactive coaching type mechanism. You can use them to help that you update your CV. You can use them to explore what your career options are and brainstorm what might be more fulfilling for you. You can use them to sit down and plan or build courage to be able to raise a concern. So there's different ways we can use that mechanism to decide how you're going to do the next step or plan what you could be doing instead. So I definitely recommend, rather than taking money out of your own wallet to go and speak to someone about those things, utilize that EAP program in your workplace. They are confidential, so your organization won't find out who you are. They just hear that somebody from some department has had a session. And if you can encourage people in your workplace to start using it more, your organization will start to see that they're having to pay money somewhere else anyway.
I love those points, Lorna, because when we think of mental health, that's usually like a lot of people are just like, oh, I don't need a counselor, or like you said, it's like the last stop. And in a way, it could be like a beginning stop. Like if you don't know, you gave us some really great tips there, some time to take notice. Like if you don't even know where to start with that, why not go and see, the counselor and find like how do I stay present? That's like a question I get a lot. Like how do I focus? How do I not think about something? Of course, I have an answer for that. You're not gonna ever not think about something. It's okay. It's just, focus on one thought at a time and decide whether or not it's worth the energy. So, but I love, exactly all the directions that you are, pointing us into and letting us know that mental health is not a disease, but it's just like you take care of your body, basically, is what you're saying. You take care of your brain, and it's that simple.
Just occurred to me that label of mental health, right? Everyone has mental health, whether it's good or bad. And the dial can move in both extremes, right? Because I know it has for me. When I've been in roles where I haven't felt safe, I felt really low, my batteries, tiredness, and you feel a bit trapped. On the other side of it, when you're in a really psychologically safe team and it feels like a community and you feel like you're doing something meaningful, it's the complete opposite end. So when people say mental health, to some people it sounds like there's a problem. For me, it's just like, well, are you checking in with yourself? And to your point, Laura, to some of those tips, but also if leaders are listening to this, or organizations that are lost their way a bit, what does it look like? When we say leaders go there first, what does self-care look like for leaders? What would you say to leaders listening? What do they need to do first in order to even start putting those building blocks and that foundation in place for people to trust each other and feel safe?
Yeah, it's the exact same things there. It's those 5 ways to well-being. So it might be that they take a couple of days out or make a plan. So in New Zealand, we have a thing called te whare tapawha. So from a Māori perspective of looking after your well-being, they envision it as like a whare, so house. And so they talk about your spiritual well-being, and the foundations of whānau is part of that. And whānau is family, but it's wider than just your kids and partner. It is all those people in your community. So I love that model because it has this appreciation for the spiritual sort of concept, and the community connection is so strong in there. And they talk about the nourishing side of things. Within that model, where it's significantly different to the 5 ways of well-being is the connection. So you could create your te whare tapawha as a team. So it's about how you are connecting as part of that community. And you're thinking about it in the interconnections between your relationships. So you can create that in the concept of the 5 ways of well-being. So as a people leader, being able to recognize in your people when they're creating stress upon you because of their lack of well-being. So reminding your staff that that you are giving them the space to connect. So a water cooler conversation is okay, because that allows you to disengage from your work. That allows you to socially connect with someone, which improves your well-being. It might be that manager is currently getting stressed because they think they're not getting productivity because people are having water cooler conversation. So as a leader, taking the time to invest in what enables productivity and that concept of uptime and downtime, to getting a fuller view of how your staff well-being will enable your well-being, essentially, so that you're not moving into micromanaging and things like that. So you're helping your staff flourish and perform, and in doing so, it helps you. There is obviously that concept of put on your own mask in the plane before you put on a child's. So you might need time off. You might just need to take some leave to be able to look at your own well-being first and nourish yourself a little bit if you're already at that point of languishing instead of flourishing. So Peter, you talked about the concept of we are all in a state of mental health. We all have mental health. I can have a mental illness, so I could be diagnosed with a mental illness and I can still flourish. So that's a part that I think some people forget. They think, oh, somebody's mentally ill. Oh no. That doesn't mean they don't have the ability to be highly productive and flourish. They will need to continue to look after those 5 ways of well-being whilst they look after their diagnosis things and how they need to look after their diagnosis. So it's understanding both of those exist in tension, essentially. So I can have no diagnosis of mental illness, and I could be very mentally well, but stress is causing me to languish, essentially. So therefore, I've been neglecting my 5 ways of well-being, but I don't have a diagnosis situation. So we kind of need to look at both of those things in tension. And as a leader, it's important that we're thinking about looking after your personal well-being and considering what it takes to reduce workplace stresses for yourself and your team.
So I'm not sure if you saw the comment, Mira, and but I took it down because it was covering your faces. So.
No, you should have left it up. I was trying to read it.
Okay, so you can, right? We just can't see you, but Mira, if you want to,
It's important to read it. Yeah,
jump into that. Yeah,
I've noticed there's a dynamic shift to conscious leadership, especially as millennials moving to higher leadership. It is really interesting to me, as I think it's because society has changed. You know, when we were born, there were other things that were important in the world, and then when the new generations and our parents, they were just working, and it was, you know, after the Second World War and all of that, and then each generation has different needs because they already have other stuff covered. And so I think that millennials have seen mistakes of their parents, yes. And they want different life. They want meaning in work. And I think I was recently talking with somebody just really about this. And some of my clients, they are younger. It's not money so much. It is the good company that has good values, that appreciates people that work over there. And there's meaning in work. It doesn't mean that we all have to be doctors, but it means that we are contributing to the growth of that company. So even a person that it's working shop fronts, for example, job, they want to be included in the whole direction where the company is going. They want to be part of it. And I think this is where this shift happens. And it's really amazing, you know, because the values are different. The way we see the world is different. And I've noticed it. Yeah. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, there's a massive mismatch, isn't there? Where, as Mira said, the younger generations have got they've got different wants and needs, and they will do, like every other generation that will come after them as well. But I see that there's legacy in companies now, especially the larger ones. Sorry to say that out loud, but it's true, right? Dare I say, some of these legacy companies, they have to start shifting their awareness and look at it from a conscious leadership point and that from that frame. And therefore then they're going to look at things rather than paying it lip service. And, we talked about it before. Yeah, it's great to have away days and all of this stuff. And it's, it can be fun. But when the things get challenging and there's, constant change and targets to be met and money to be made, if the job's not meaningful and it's not congruent with what these younger people want, they will just vote with their feet. And, it might not happen in the weeks or months, but years later, all of your top talent will just disappear if you don't shift.
And there was something, sorry, just a simple observation from the conversation we had today and the other stuff that I'm noticing. It looks to me that decline of mental health of the people in the company leads to decline of productivity and lots of other relationships and there's arguments going on and all of that. But that is just a sign that we need to step back. It's not sign that something is wrong with people. If somebody's has high stress and can't cope with something or are showing signs of ill health, it doesn't mean that something is wrong with we can really use that as a gauge to where we are at and then help ourselves to go on the right track rather than punishing, oh, this person isn't good for us, let's find somebody else, and doing these shortcuts that are not going to solve the real problem. Sorry,
that's very true.
I cut you off.
No, that's fine. I just, this conversation has been just so rich, and we've gotten the opportunity to go in so many different directions just to understand the vastness of what mental health is and how deeply it affects organizations. And like I said, we have like the benefit of being on 3 different continents here on 2 different days. So I really appreciate having you here with us today, Laurna. And if you could just give us one closing golden nugget,
Oh, I suppose for those of you who are in leadership roles and you're wondering, where do I start and what do I do? Is look to any survey material you do have. So you may have pulse check systems or engagement surveys, and they will have well-being metrics or psychological safety-based metrics. And if they don't, you need to be pushing back on the company that gives you that material.
And calling Laurna or Peter.
And finding out from that information you do have where your pain points are. Really think about those workplace stresses that we've talked about today. And use that as a gauge of where to start, and then use that to start conversations. So don't just do it to your people. Have conversations with your people about, I'm noticing blah. What are you noticing? Or I've looked at the surveys, and this is what it's telling me. How do you feel about that? And what do you think we need to do? Engage your people in the journey rather than do it to them.
Thank you, Toma, for joining us. She actually is in leadership here in the DC area. So, and thank you for your questions, and for those of you who were viewing live and who will be watching on the replay. We will be looking for your questions, so we'll be present for that. I'm going to let Peter or Mira, whoever wants to close today, since I opened. So.
Oh, that's my turn. Well, thank you very much, Laurna. And as Cordelia said, this has been a wonderful conversation. And thank you, everybody who's been watching us. And if you have any further questions, there is so you can get back to us via email, via website, www.unlearninglabels.com, or you can go on our LinkedIn page, Unlearning Labels, and post questions over there in the chat area so that we can all engage in conversations, our guests and all three of us. That would be wonderful. So thank you very much for listening and being here with us. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You, Laurna.
You're welcome.